Democrats, ruling class Democrats, really go all out to portray any third party candidacy, particularly one to their left. They don't care as much about libertarians or whatever. But anytime there's a Green Party candidate, for instance, they say, "Oh my gosh, you're gonna pull votes from our great Democrat Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or whoever it is and spoil their election." And I wish I had thought to look it up, but Jordan from Status Quo played a collage of video segments from the past week or so in the corporate media, just within the past week, going on and on and on. Well, not on and on, but just repeatedly in every news outlet you can think of that supports Democrats or Biden. Oh, Cornel West is going to be a spoiler. Well, gosh, we're so, what about Cornel West spoiling Joe Biden's reelection? Well, Cornel was asked about that, and he gave basically the same answer that I would and was going to give tonight, which is they're not honest when they say they're worried about that. They don't really fucking care if you quote unquote spoil their candidate's election, which I put that in quotation marks because our votes don't belong to anybody, right? They're our votes. We can choose to vote for whoever we want. If we're worried that it's going to make a big difference if Joe Biden rather than Donald Trump, or whichever Democrat rather than whichever Republican winds up being the nominees, wins, that it's going to be if voters really think that it's going to make that big a difference, they can just vote for Biden or whoever the Democrat is. They could have voted for Hillary Clinton. They could have voted for George Bush, etc. And as a matter of fact, back in 2016, a lot more Obama voters voted for Donald Trump than voted for Jill Stein. There were several million people who had voted for Obama who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. There were also millions and millions of Democrats, including a couple 100,000 in the crucial deciding state of Florida, who voted for George Bush in the 2000 election. And of course, there's all these people who don't vote. So, why is it all our fault? Which, we don't even like Democrats anyway. Most of us who support the Green Party or other, left-leaning third parties, we don't even like Democrats. There was a poll done following the 2016 election where they asked voters for third-party candidates, Jill Stein as a Green Party candidate for president, Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party candidate for president, and they asked those people who they would have voted for if their favored candidate were not running. What if the choices were only Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump? Who would you vote for? And the majority of both the Jill Stein Green Party voters and the Gary Johnson Libertarian Party voters said they just wouldn't have voted. And yes, more Libertarian voters said they would have voted for Trump than would have voted for Clinton, and vice versa with the Green Party voters. But it wasn't that many of them. It was like, I don't have the exact figures called up, but it was something like 25% saying they would have voted for Clinton out of the Jill Stein voters if there had been no third-party candidates. And maybe 15% said they would have voted for Trump. And then all the rest, actually, I think it was more like 2/3, not just 60%, said they would not have voted at all if they only had those two choices. Now, of course, that's never the case, right? There's always a third-party candidate. Go all the way back in history, you won't find an American election where there's not alternatives to whatever the two major parties have been, which for the past 150 years or so, it's been the Democrats and the Republicans. But anyway, getting back to the point, the Democrats really don't care about spoilers. They don't care that much if Donald Trump wins instead of Joe Biden or whoever it is that are the candidates of the respective major parties. How do we know they don't care? Well, they don't support ranked choice voting. They try to discourage you from voting third party regardless of whether or not you live in a swing state. And one thing that really annoys me about a lot of people who not the elite, not politicians, but just regular folks like Jordan Chariton of Status Quo in 2020, who were very insistent on the importance of voting for the Democrat instead of voting for a third party, to prevent Trump from winning. Even though he personally lives in New York, and lots of people who adopt this attitude don't live in a state where that would make any difference anyway. But anyway, so Democrats try to discourage you from voting third party, regardless of whether or not you live in a swing state. So, if this were a matter of being strategic, as opposed to a matter of simply trying to dampen the success of the Green Party or any other alternative to the Democrats, if they were actually doing this as a matter of strategy, then they wouldn't take this approach. They would say, if you live in a swing state, you better vote for our candidate. If you live in, say, California or New York or Indiana, which is very Republican, where I live, do whatever. And that's not the attitude they take. They are pushing to suppress third parties. They also don't push very hard for abolishing the Electoral College, even though they've lost 2 elections in this century, in 2000 and 2016, where their candidate had a majority of the popular vote. So Al Gore had a slim majority in 2000. If they had properly counted the votes, his majority would have been a little bigger. But there were some shenanigans, which we can get into some other time, I guess, in Florida. That meant that Bush won that state by about 500 votes, but he really should have lost by several thousand, at least not even counting all the people that were disenfranchised as a result of efforts by Governor Jeb Bush in Florida and his associates, basically fraudulently disqualifying an awful lot of people, tens of thousands of people, from voting by falsely claiming that they were felons, which at the time you couldn't vote in Florida if you had a felony conviction. The Democrats didn't really raise a fuss about that Republican election rigging in 2000 in Florida, or about when basically the same thing happened using a different technique in 2016. Republicans were able to take well, nationwide, millions of people off the voter registration lists prior to the 2016 general election on illegitimate grounds, like they would, for example, local Republican election officials would send postcards to voters, asking them if they were still at that address, and if they didn't get a response, they would remove people from the voter rolls. And the reason that they did this was that statistically, it's a whole lot more likely for poorer people, disproportionately people of color, but poorer people to move and then not get the forwarded mail or what have you. But the Democrats have done very little about voter suppression. A few of them have tried to do something. Stacey Abrams from Georgia did, because she, in fact, lost the governor's race largely because of the voter suppression that Jeff Kemp, the Secretary of State there in Georgia, engaged in. So if they really care, they'll crack down on this, but they don't. Many people have alleged that the 2016 primary was rigged against Bernie Sanders, who polls throughout the primaries indicated where they compared various, there were just two Democratic candidates who got significant votes in those primaries, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So the polls compared how Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders would do against Donald Trump, who ran away with the the Republican nomination in that election. And consistently, the polls showed that Bernie Sanders would have done significantly better against Trump in the general election than Hillary Clinton. Now, we don't know for sure what would have happened, but that's what the polls were suggesting. And most obvious example of how the 2016 primary was stacked against Bernie Sanders. The establishment really wanted Hillary Clinton to win, even though polls suggested she wouldn't have been as competitive a candidate against Donald Trump as Bernie Sanders would have been. Hundreds of so-called superdelegates, the bigwigs in the Democratic Party who vote for who they're going to nominate or call delegates, and most of them are pledged delegates, meaning that their votes have to reflect the proportion of votes that were cast in the primaries by voters. But superdelegates, who comprise, I think it's something like a third of the Democratic Party delegates, something like that, a third, a fourth, but a lot. Hundreds of them committed their votes to Hillary Clinton prior to any voters having voted in the primaries. And Sanders only won about 10% of those superdelegates. The other 90%, in most cases, were already saying they were going to vote for Hillary Clinton before there were even any primaries. So, the mass media played a very disingenuous role in this by constantly showing what the delegate count was during the race, when the primaries actually started, where they included the superdelegate count, without necessarily mentioning that hey, these are people who have committed to vote, in most cases for Hillary Clinton, even though that doesn't reflect the will of the voters. So Sanders wound up losing quite a few states as a result of those superdelegate votes, where he had won the popular vote in those primaries by a landslide. So evidently, these Democratic Party bigwigs were, a lot more concerned with making sure Bernie Sanders didn't get the nomination than they were with fielding the most competitive Democratic candidate against Donald Trump. And another thing that suggests that Democrats don't really care that much if Trump wins, although they're trying to stop him from running at all by throwing one after another criminal charge against him. And granted, there probably are legitimate things, criminal things that he's done, but you could certainly say the same thing about Joe Biden. But they would abolish the Electoral College. They would support ranked choice voting, where you can pick, like, let's say, for example, you preferred Cornel West, but if it came down to Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, i.e., Cornel West didn't have enough votes to have any chance of winning, and so it was between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Did I say Clinton or Biden? I meant Biden. You could make Cornel West your first choice, but make Joe Biden your second choice if you prefer Joe Biden. That's how ranked choice voting works. So that would eliminate the spoiler problem. But the Democrats don't want to do that, because they don't care. Another indication that they don't really care, and this is another thing that Cornel West mentioned, is they seem very intent so far on sticking with Joe Biden, even though, as Jordan Chariton mentioned, lots and lots of recent polls were saying that almost every possible Republican nominee, including some who aren't actually announced as candidates yet, is polling ahead of Joe Biden. Donald Trump was a little bit ahead of Joe Biden. Ron DeSantis was even with Joe Biden. I think Ramaswamy was maybe a little bit behind Joe Biden, but Nikki Haley was ahead of Joe Biden, but quite a lot. So, they don't seem to care that much that voters really don't like Joe Biden. His popularity ratings have been on par with or below what Donald Trump's were when Trump was president. Overwhelmingly, polls suggest that people think he's too old, and what they probably really mean is they think he's too senile, but pollsters aren't going to ask them that. So far they're riding with Biden.